I am Blair Bennett. 27, and last Thanksgiving, the clock in my parents' living room ticked, while my father called me a freeloader and told me to be gone by the weekend. I kept my voice steady, rinsed my plate, and started counting what lived under my name. In the weeks that followed, I opened a clean account spoke in the language of emails and contracts and stood at a rehearsal dinner with no seat set for me. On the wedding morning, I took my card off every vendor on time, and when the hallway shout came, I answered with policy, not volume. The calls stacked, the door shook, a pawn ticket surfaced, and a pair of keys decided what belonged to whom. This is not a story about rage. It is about the kind of quiet that holds. If the people who raised you name you a burden, what does justice look like without a courtroom? Stay with me, and I will show you step by steady step how paper patience and a clean yes and no can turn a family storm into a clear sky. Thanksgiving evening, November 28, 2024. The mantel clock in my parents' living room ticked like a steady metronome, while the heat from the turkey made the dining room windows fog at the edges. I sat in the place I had always taken as a teenager, halfway down the table with my new promotion still warm in my chest like a secret I had dared to share. The china was our good set, the one my mother carried out only twice a year, and the green beans squeaked against porcelain as she nudged them around and around her plate. My father cleared his throat, planted both hands on the table, and announced to the whole family that I was a freeloader and that I had to be out of the house by the weekend. There was a hush so complete I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the radiator knocking once behind the wall. My mother kept her eyes on those green beans as if they might spell out a different future if she stared hard enough. Tessa went perfectly still. I could see the shine of water in her glass, and the slight tremor in her hand reflected there. I did not feel the heat in my cheeks right away. What I felt was the quick click of numbers, the practical roll call of everything in this house that lived under my name. Electricity, water, internet, my mother's insurance. The refrigerator I had replaced in July when the old one failed on a 90-degree day. I thought of the auto pays I had set up because my father said the office mix-up was temporary and because my mother could not lose her appointment again. The fork in my hand hovered over sweet potatoes slick with butter. The clock ticked again. I set the fork down. My voice surprised me with its steadiness as I told him I understood. No drama, no pleading, just a clean acknowledgement that the words had landed. I gathered my plate, the weight of it more awkward than heavy, and I rose. Chairs scraped. No one stopped me, and there was a strange mercy in that. I carried the plate to the kitchen, rinsed it under water that ran hot and stubborn, then set it in the drying rack the way my mother liked them, stacked largest to smallest. It felt important even then to do one last thing the way she would prefer. In the doorway I paused and looked back at the length of the table. The candlesticks had burned down into small puddles, wax cooling in pale rims that would be hard to pry off later. My father's jaw was set. My mother's shoulders had rounded as if someone had laid a winter coat across them. Tessa kept her eyes on her lap. I thought about the promotion letter folded neatly in my purse and how only 20 minutes earlier I had been speaking about new responsibilities and a raise that would mean breathing room. The word freeloader did not match the ledger I carried in my phone or the one I carried in my head. Still, the word hung over the table like steam. I walked down the hallway toward my old bedroom. The carpet held the same faint scent of childhood detergent, a sweetness that felt both naive and loyal. I set the purse on the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed. I had not slept improperly for years. There were photographs on the wall that had not changed since I was 19. The girl in those frames wore a different jawline and a softer expectation of the world. I pressed my palms together and let my breath lengthen. I did not cry. The sting that should have broken me took on shape and edges, and then it hardened into something I recognized from other hard seasons. Resolve. I walked to the window and looked out at the maple trees black against a navy sky. A neighbor carried a pie dish to his car. Somewhere a television laughed. In the kitchen a cupboard shut, And then another brisk and decisive, my mother doing what she did best when life felt unmanageable, putting objects back into order. The old clock ticked on each second, a small permission to think. If I left by the weekend, I had 4 nights to pack to untangle my accounts from the house, to list out what was mine and what would be left behind. I stood there and made the kind of list women have always made when storms gather. Call the utility company about the account transfers. Check the auto pays. Photograph the receipts. Confirm the dates. Quiet tasks that create a bridge from the present to whatever comes next. I sat again and placed my hands flat on the comforter as if I were steadying a map. I reminded myself of what I had already proven. I knew how to keep the lights on. I knew how to carry insurance. I knew how to read a contract, how to ask a question twice if the first answer felt slippery, how to keep notes that could hold up to scrutiny if they ever needed to. I thought about being 27 and how that sometimes made people mistake you for a child if it suited them. The truth was simpler and less flattering. It was useful. And once usefulness blurred into expectation, expectation turned into a story that had very little to do with me and a great deal to do with control. The floorboard near the door creaked, and I heard Tessa's step hesitate, that careful pause of a girl who wants to knock and also wants to run. She did neither. Her shadow passed. I let her go. She was 17 and still negotiating her own survival in this house. There would be time later for sister talk and a plan. Tonight I needed the calm that comes when a path becomes simple, not easy simple. I would go. I would go not as a daughter shamed into exile, but as a woman who knows how to pick up a life and move it. I would be the one at the wheel. The thought settled in my chest like a weight and like a key, both at once. I picked up my purse again. In the bathroom I washed my hands and watched the water ribbon away. My face in the mirror looked older than 27 and younger than the kind of woman who lets bitterness turn the corners of her mouth down. The clock ticked in the other room. I turned off the bathroom light and walked back toward the kitchen. I checked the stove, twisted each knob to off, and straightened the dish towel on the oven handle. Old habits. Practical kindnesses. The kinds of things you do even when you have been told you do not belong. Then I opened the back door, stepped onto the small porch where the air was cold and clean, and let the night settle over me like a shawl. I breathed in. I breathed out. I could hear the clock even from here. Tick, tick. Time moved me forward whether anyone at that table liked it or not. I zipped the suitcase on my bed and felt the teeth catch and settle like a decision. The house had fallen into that late-hour quiet that makes even the furnace breathe softer. I took my phone and a thin notebook down the hall to the little alcove where my parents kept the family desk. The brass lamp cast a small circle of warm light. Paper smelled like paper and dust. I pulled the top drawer and found the familiar mix of manila folders, rubber bands, and a pen cup with a chipped rim. This was the place my mother trusted more than memory. If the truth lived anywhere in this house, it would live here. I started with the routine stack. The household utilities with my name on the remittance line went into one neat pile to my left. I tapped the stack flat so it would not look like a protest. Beneath that simple layer was a different story. Bank statements with my father's name at the top, 3 months in a row with a fourth folded behind. I traced the balances with a fingertip. A steady climb from $4,000 to almost $7,000. The deposits did not match his hours at the hardware store. The math did not match any season I knew. Clipped to the statements was a glossy pamphlet for a fishing boat with a white hull polished to a mirror. In blue ink, someone had written down payment $5,500, then delivery after Thanksgiving. I pictured the square of space in the garage where my bicycle still leaned, and where a box of hose coils waited for spring. I understood the plan in a single glance. Make room in the garage and in this house by moving the grown daughter who kept the lights on. I photographed every page. First the statement headers and account numbers, then the dates and ending balances, then the brochure with the handwriting. I stepped back and took a wide shot of the whole layout on the desk for a clear record. After that I crouched to the bottom shelf and slid out the shoebox where my mother keeps older receipts. Inside was a small history of the house, a blender here, a space heater there, a metal file for the front porch. I slid my stack of utility receipts into the front and wrote my initials across the top with the date. Tessa hovered in the doorway. She always moves like that, as if sound might break something fragile. She did not sit. She watched my hands the way you watch a surgeon, hopeful and a little afraid. In a quiet voice, she said they were waiting for me to cover the November bills. She said the plan was to turn my room into storage when Dad bought the boat. The word storage felt bitter in my mouth. She swallowed and said our mother's recent appointments were not checkups. Fillers. The word landed between us like a shared secret that had cost both of us too much. I kept my hands busy. The phone shutter ticked softly with each image. I told her I was not angry with her. She is 17 and has been holding her breath in this house for years. She asked what I would do. I said what I knew. Document, then disentangle. She rested her fingers on the doorframe as if to take a pulse from the wood, then slipped away toward her room. 2 details could not be left to memory. I opened my notebook and wrote them on the first page, then underlined them the way I do at work when timelines will be questioned. Months ago, the family asked me to front several wedding items for my brother Ethan. We signed vendor contracts with my payment information because someone had to be reachable, and I picked up my phone. That was one. For safety, I had given my parents a spare key to my one and only car after an appointment in August when Mom said emergencies happen and we should be practical. That was 2. Simple facts noted while everyone would still remember. I made a folder from a fresh manila sleeve and printed the date across the tab. I slid the printed bills with my name, the photos, and the notes inside, then tapped the edges to square the stack. I put the shoebox back in its place. I wiped a single thumbprint from the lamp base because my mother notices fingerprints the way some people notice weather. The house settled like a body exhaling. I carried the folder to my room and held it against my chest for a moment. It felt warm, simply because I had been holding it. I tucked it between sweaters in my suitcase so it would not bend. Then I stood in the door of the alcove and memorized what I might not see like this again: the chipped pen cup. The ceramic dish is full of thumbtacks. The little calendar already flipped to December, though the last page of November had not yet been lived. The lamp pool of light and the safe dark beyond it. Simple things, not precious in any store. Precious because they kept order when we needed order to stand in for kindness. I turned out the lamp and let the dark smooth the edges of a long day. I could feel the list forming without having to write it yet. Start the transfers on the utilities. End any autopay that does not belong to me. Move each login behind a new password and 2 factors. Photograph the serials on the electronics I purchased. Set aside the receipts that prove what is mine when no one wants to remember. These are not war drums. These are the quiet tasks that carry a person from one life to the next. Back in my room, I unzipped the suitcase halfway and added the notebook to the folder. A small voice in my head tried to tally the fairness of it all, then fell quiet on its own. The numbers already knew the truth. I looked at the old dresser and the mirror where a younger girl used to practice smiling for yearbook photos. I looked at the window where the maple branches laddered up into a winter sky. I stood there long enough to feel my heart settle into a slow and workable rhythm. When I lay down, the house made its old familiar sounds. Pipes adjusting. The wind ruffled the eaves. A car rolling by on wet pavement. I thought about the garage and the blank space where a boat would one day live. I thought about the spare key resting in a kitchen drawer, harmless until the day it is not. I thought about a stack of vendor contracts that would need different hands on them soon. None of it felt dramatic. It felt like a series of locks and the right sequence of keys. I woke before the sun and packed the last of my clothes into the suitcase, then carried my folder to the car, while the neighborhood still felt half asleep. Downtown Columbus looked rinsed clean after a thin night rain. I parked outside Drew and Max's apartment and climbed the stairs with the kind of caution that belongs to people who are carrying both luggage and pride. Drew opened the door with her scrubs still wrinkled from the overnight shift and told me to take the pull-out. Max set a fresh sheet down and said he would be out of my way. I thanked them with the quiet of a person who has run out of grand words. The sofa opened like a small mercy. I slept for an hour with my folder under the pillow, the way a child sleeps with a keepsake. By 7, I had coffee in a travel mug and a short list. I drove to Buckeye Community Credit Union and sat with a patient woman who explained account options while I watched my reflection in the glass of her cubicle. We opened a fresh check and a small savings. I moved my balance and set up a new debit card, then asked her to flag the account for extra verification. Back in the car, I enabled 2 factors on email and banking the text code, lighting my phone like a lighthouse. I reset every password to something strong enough to hold. I turned on fraud alerts and added a second recovery method that no one else knew. These steps are not glamorous. They are the infrastructure of peace. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started the calls. The electric company first, then water and the internet. I asked them to remove my name from any account that did not belong to me and to end any autopay that pulled from my cards. I used my calm voice, the one I learned in middle management when tempers rose. Representatives asked me to spell my name, then asked again, typing and pausing while the line hummed like a distant highway. Each call ended with a confirmation number. I pasted every number into a document and saved it to a cloud folder named November Reset. When the calls were done, I opened my email and searched for threads from the planner, Maya Flores. There they were, a map of how I had slipped from helpful to responsible to expected. The DJ contract listed my card for the deposit and the balance. The florist order attached my card as payer. The cake, the limousine, the room block at the downtown hotel where out-of-town guests would sleep. Maya's emails were crisp and complete. She had included a section that allowed the payer to remove or reassign payment with written notice. The venue's house policy wrote along in a separate attachment. Final payments due by 10 a.m. on the wedding day. Services without a current payer would shift to pending status until a new card was provided. I read those lines twice and felt something in my spine straighten. There is relief in remembering that clear agreements exist and that I am allowed to step back inside them. I opened my calendar and created a reminder for 6 a.m. on the wedding morning that simply said "remove card." Then I set a second reminder for 9:30 to check that all confirmation emails had arrived. I made a note in the folder that any non-refundable amounts would be treated as sunk costs. I would not claw back what had already been used. I would not pretend that money could undo what patterns had done. Drew sat across from me and handed me a bowl of oatmeal with brown sugar. She told me that in the ER you learn to do first things first. Airway, breathing, circulation. I told her this was my version. Accounts, authentication, contracts. She smiled the tired smile of a nurse who has stood up through the night and said that order saves more than time. Max left for his office with a wave and a promise to text if I needed a ride anywhere. A small kindness steadies a person more than grand gestures ever could. I sent Maya a short email that said I would be removing my card on the wedding morning per the terms she had provided, and that any further payment arrangements should be handled between her and the groom. I thanked her for including the house policy and attached my notice letter to each vendor. My hands shook a little as I hit send on the last message, not from fear, but from the sensation of stepping onto a different floor than the one I had been standing on for months. Before noon, I opened a new secure folder labeled Wedding Documents and filed the contracts, the policy, and my notices together. I wrote a clean summary for myself that listed the 10 a.m. deadline and the pending status rule in language simple enough for any tired version of me to understand. Then I closed the laptop and let the quiet settle into my shoulders. I had moved money, fortified the doorways of my life, and named what I would and would not carry. It was enough for a single morning. The rest could wait until tomorrow. Evening settled early on January 3rd, and Maple Ridge Event Center glowed like a promise someone else had made. I pulled into the lot with a small gift envelope in my bag and a steadier breath than I had expected. Inside the foyer smelled like evergreen and buttercream. A young hostess pointed me toward the private room where the families were gathered. I smoothed my coat, tucked the envelope under my arm, and walked in with the posture of a woman who knows how to be polite when grace would be wasted. Aunt Carol Bennett Sloan reached me first. She always chooses barbs that pass for manners. She said the drive from her subdivision took ages, then looked at my shoes and said at least one of us still believes in dressing up. My mother stood near the dessert table and sent me a glance sharp enough to slice fondant. I set the gift envelope beside a stack of cards and chose a place to stand that would block no servers. A chart near the entrance listed the rehearsal seating by name and table. My name was not on it. The ink looked very sure of itself. Ethan crossed the room with a quick grin already collapsing at the corners. He leaned in with that loud half-joke people use when the point is to humiliate without the work of owning it. He told me not to look for a chair because there was no space. The table beside us fell quiet, the way a lake still goes when a storm hits the shoreline. I saw one cousin glance at the floor. I saw my mother pretend to be delighted by a tray of shrimp. The part of me that used to flare hot stayed cool. I let the words settle where they belonged, on him, not on me. I found Maya Flores near the staging doors, her tablet hugged to her chest, a woman carrying a dozen timelines at once. I told her I would remove my card at 6 a.m. per the terms she had sent. I told her any further payments would need to be handled by the groom. She listened the way professionals listen, head slightly tilted, eyes clear, no drama imported from the family. She said the notice was in order and that she would watch for confirmation emails. She did not ask me to reconsider. Professionals rarely ask you to stay in a job you have not been paid to do. Colin Everett. The venue manager stood near the bar, conferring with a bartender about glassware counts. I introduced myself and asked him to review Maple Ridge policy one more time. He did so calmly, like a man reciting a weather report. Final payments are due by 10 a.m. on the wedding day. Services without an active payer move to pending until a new card is provided. No exceptions. He said that last part as an assurance, not a threat. I thanked him, and in the thanking felt something like relief. Clarity is a kind of mercy. Across the room, the bride Sophie Hayes glanced in my direction. It was not an unkind look. It was the quick calculation of a woman who has done enough gatherings to spot where logistics are sagging. She leaned toward Maya and asked about providing a new card from her side of the family. I could not hear the words, but I knew the choreography. A card would be offered. A balance would clear. A timeline would reset. The pressure had begun its rightful migration. The rehearsal itself rolled forward. A pastor spoke about the shape of vows, while people held programs and practiced smiling at the correct moments. I kept to the edge and stayed out of photographs. The servers brought small plates of pasta and salad, and I accepted a glass of water because refusing hospitality is a kind of rudeness I reserve for emergencies. Aunt Carol told a story about Ethan in kindergarten that had him wearing a crown. My mother laughed too loudly at the end of it. A stranger at the next table asked where I was sitting at the ceremony. I said I would be wherever I was, not in the way. When there was a break for coffee, I slipped my phone from my bag and checked the calendar. The reminder for 6 a.m. sat there like a lighthouse. The second reminder at 9:30 waited below it. I looked at the small envelope on the gift table and felt satisfied by the tidy way I had written their names. A note rested inside the kind that says blessings and means them without promising to hold anything up. Ethan drifted back toward me once, then checked his watch and veered toward a cluster of groomsmen. I let him go. I was not there for a scene. I wanted the planner to have clear notice and the manager to have my calm face in his memory. I wanted the bride to see that a woman can leave a room before it stains her and still wish her well. I took my coat from the back of a chair and walked to the hallway. The framed photos of past weddings followed me out, couples beaming under arbors, couples dipping in choreographed joy. I paused at the door and listened to the low hum of rehearsal chatter, the service rhythm of people carrying plates, the click of a microphone being tested. Then I stepped into the evening cold. The air in January does not pretend to be gentle. It wakes you up. I stood for a moment under a streetlight and let the clarity settle in my bones. I was not sabotaging a thing. I was stepping back from bankrolling what never should have been mine to carry. From here on, the ledger belonged to the groom. January 4th began before the sky knew its color. The apartment was quiet, except for the slow drip of coffee and the soft click of my trackpad. I opened the folder labeled Wedding Documents and set my phone timer beside the laptop like a small guard. At 6 on the dot, I logged into the first vendor portal and felt that familiar steadiness run down my spine. This was not a fight. This was paperwork. The DJ portal loaded with a clean dashboard and a line that showed a deposit already posted. 300 marked non-refundable per the contract. I filled out the removal request and attached the language from Maya's email that allowed payer-initiated removal. I did not ask for the deposit back. I selected the option to notify the vendor that future arrangements would come from the groom. At 6:02, the confirmation email landed in my inbox. I dragged it into the Wedding Documents folder and wrote the time in my notes. The florist site asked for a code texted to my phone. I entered it and the order page opened with thumbnails of bouquets and a balance of $900. The policy section showed that half of the total was refundable on products not yet prepped. I submitted the removal request and the system issued a credit for $450 back to the original method. I took a screenshot of the status page with the timestamp and saved it beside the email confirmation. I breathed out and let my shoulders drop an inch. The bakery portal still wore a holiday theme and a banner that said production was in progress. The cake invoice showed 500 marked non-refundable once baking had begun. Their notes indicated a start time the previous evening. I filed the removal request with the contract language attached and received an automated reply that the balance would shift to pending new payer. I added a line in my summary that the cake deposit remained sunk cost. That phrase rests like a stone, heavy and useful. The limousine company used an older system that required a phone call to finish. I entered the online removal request and read their policy again. 300 fully refundable if canceled 4 hours before service. Our pickup was scheduled for early afternoon, so the clock was on my side. The screen showed status pending and asked me to expect a follow-up call. I saved the page and made a note that the refund would be processed when the vendor finalized the cancellation. I do not measure my life in refunds, but I record them with care. The hotel portal for the room block loaded last. The page displayed a countdown to noon, the hour when unclaimed rooms would be released if a new card did not arrive. I removed my card from the file and left a courtesy note in the message box that the groom's party would need to provide updated payment to maintain the block. I photographed the screen and filed the image. By 6:30, my inbox held a tidy row of confirmations. I composed a short email to Maya. I listed each vendor with the time the removal was submitted, noted the florist credit the cake deposit that remained the limousine status pending and the hotel policy that pointed to noon. I reminded her of the venue rule about final payments due by 10 in the morning. I asked that all further contact be directed to the groom. I read the email once for clarity and once for tone, then pressed send. A copy filed itself to the cloud without drama. The apartment window showed a thin blue at the edge of the sky. Somewhere down the hall a shower started and a door closed. I closed my laptop and carried my wallet to my bag, letting the leather slide against the lining with a soft sound that felt like an answer. The cords of money that had tied me to other people's obligations were being loosened by clauses and confirmations, not by anger. Calm beats clever when you are disassembling a burden piece by piece. I washed my mug and left it to dry. I checked my phone and set a reminder for 9:30 to verify that all confirmations had been posted correctly, then another for 10 to confirm the venue deadline had passed into someone else's hands. I stood still long enough to feel the room hold me up. Ordinary light on an ordinary morning. I had done what the outline of my own ethics required. No more and no less. I dressed and slipped on my shoes. I tucked the folder back into my tote, even though every file was already backed up twice. Habit keeps you safe when the day ahead is crowded with feelings that are not yours to manage. I locked the door behind me and walked toward the elevator, every step light, every step mine. By late morning, Maple Ridge had the glow of a snow globe that someone had just shaken. The ballroom lights threw warm gold across polished floors, and the florals lined the aisle in careful rows that made strangers believe in order. I walked in through the side entrance with a small breath held in my chest and a steady rhythm in my step. Near the door, a seating chart stood on an easel under a spray of winter greenery. The names flowed in tidy columns. My eyes moved down the list as if they had their own logic. My name was not there. The cardstock did not apologize. The string quartet tuned a thin shimmer of sound that always makes people stand up straighter than they mean to. Maya moved through the room like a woman counting heartbeats, brisk and focused, stopping to tap a screen and then confer with Colin at the edge of the dance floor. I could see the small nods between them. Don't panic. Process. In another corner, Sophie caught Maya's sleeve and drew her close. They spoke in a low tone, a private lane in a crowded highway. I could not hear the words, but I knew the question. Would a card from her side clear a balance? Would a service move forward with updated payment? Logistics are their own language, and women learn to speak it early. I stayed on the outskirts, where the staff could move and where I would not be drafted into photographs designed to say a family had behaved itself. Aunt Carol watched me from across a cluster of chairs and sent a look that was part curiosity, part sport. My mother hovered near a table of programs, smoothing a stack that did not need smoothing. I took a glass of water from a passing tray and held it as if it were a talisman that could keep me from saying more than I meant to. There is a moment at any ceremony when all the choreography tries to fall apart. It is not malice. It is time doing what time does. Ethan came toward me in that moment, hurried steps, face red at the edges. The energy of a man who has been told to resolve a balance with daylight still left on the clock. He stopped too close in the small aisle between tables. He spoke in the register of performance, the kind of voice that expects a crowd. He said I was a leech. He said there was no place for me here. He used words like stones heavy and meant to bruise. I did not lift my chin. I did not match his volume. I met his eyes and let a small smile settle on my face the way you set a teacup down so it does not rattle. I told him just enough for him to hear that everything I had fronted had been handled within the terms. The rest was his shoulder. I slid my wallet into my bag and felt the simple relief of leather against lining. There are times when dignity is not an ornament but a tool. Around us, the air changed in that subtle way rooms do when a spectacle has ended without the catharsis anyone came for. A cousin looked away. An usher pretended to check a row. My mother kept her gaze on the programs as if they might tear if she looked up. I did not wait for a reply. I did not offer a softer line for him to grab. I stepped aside so a server could pass with trays, then walked toward the foyer with the tempo of a woman leaving a dentist appointment tidy and complete. From the hallway I could still hear the quartet ease into a prelude. Maya and Colin stood near the service door. Heads together, the calm choreography of policy moving forward. A vendor with a rolling cart paused, checked a tablet, and waited for a nod that would come from the correct person. Nothing dramatic. Simply the rulebook page by page. A young bridesmaid hurried by with a ribbon in her hand and did not see me. Perfect. I had no interest in being seen. I had come for clarity, and I had it. In the foyer, a wall of framed photographs showed couples dipped under arbors and couples laughing with a joy too big for the frame. I let my hand slide along the smooth edge of the table where the guest book lay open to a blank line. I did not sign. Blessings do not require ink when the message has already been delivered in action. I shrugged into my coat and felt the weight of it settle across my shoulders, familiar and honest. Outside, the air was a bit clean against my face. Cars idled in neat rows, and the sky had that pale winter courage it wears when the sun refuses extravagance. I stood for a beat and let my breath find a reasonable pace. Inside, someone laughed the bright laugh people use when they do not want to think about money, and the quartet tightened its rhythm. I walked toward my car without looking back through the glass. The event would go on not because temper or pride demanded it, but because invoices and timelines had their say, and a new card would do what my card had done for far too long. At the door of my car, I paused and checked my phone. The reminders I had set earlier glowed and then dropped away as the hour passed to someone else's keeping. I tucked the phone into my bag and rested both hands on the roof for a small second of steadiness. No dramatic exits, no last lines. Only the clean act of leaving a room that no longer fits the truth. I opened the door and sat. The engine caught on the first turn. I let the heater warm the chill from my fingers, then shifted into drive and eased out of the lot, a woman letting the day continue on the right terms. The road out of Maple Ridge curved past bare trees and salt-streaked curbs, and my phone started its first rattle against the console before I reached the main road. I let it buzz through while the heater found its stride. Another call arrived on its heels, then another, each vibration like a pebble against glass. The screen pulsed with names I knew by heart, layered with numbers I did not, a chorus rising behind tempered glass, urgent and unhelpful. By the time I reached the light at the highway entrance, the call counter had already climbed into double digits. Ethan led the list, then my mother, then Aunt Carol, then a cluster of local numbers with no names attached. Even the planner line showed up once, a professional ripple in a tide driven by family. Texts stacked beneath the call's terse lines telling me to return to the venue to fix what I had broken, to pay what I had promised. I let them collect like snow on a railing. I set the phone to the driving mode that holds calls at bay and let the car settle into the slow lane. The sky had turned the color of paper before ink touched it. I kept my hands steady on the wheel and counted exits. The temptation to answer arrived and fell away. Nothing good waits inside a conversation that begins with a demand and a stopwatch. I gave myself the gift of arriving in one piece and saving the record for a better time. At a fuel station just off the interstate, I pulled into a quiet corner and parked. I opened the laptop and the folder labeled Wedding Documents. One email, concise and complete, would serve better than 20 defensive replies. I compiled the removal confirmations, the policy excerpts from Maya's thread, and a bulleted timeline of the morning actions with exact times. I sent this single packet to Maya with a courteous note that she could hand everything to the groom for next steps. Then I closed the email tab and did not open any new messages. The next task belonged to the future. I opened my phone and started capturing the log. Screenshots of the missed calls, then of the texts, each frame stamped with date and time. I scrolled slowly to catch every entry, even the ones that hurt to see. I saved the images to the cloud and named the folder January 4 Calls. I added a short note file that listed the numbers linked to names and the unknown numbers grouped by area code. Documentation turns noise into something a person can carry without burning their hands. Voicemail badges appeared while I worked. I did not press play. Instead, I let the phone transcribe what it would and saved those summaries with the rest. A few messages were short and full of heat. One was long and meandering, full of memories that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with power. The planner line held a brief neutral update that the venue was proceeding by policy and would await the groom's card. I tucked that in like a small feather in a nest of heavier things. Back on the road, I set the phone to silent, then to a mode that allows only emergency contacts. The car warmed fully and the late morning traffic loosened. I thought about the old habit of defending myself in real time and how much energy it had cost me in other seasons. Today I chose a different standard. If facts and contracts are bright enough to read without squinting, then silence is not weakness. It is discipline, and it is safe. Drew's building rose out of the gray like a familiar book on a shelf. I parked, gathered my tote, and climbed the stairs with careful feet. Inside the apartment, the air held the quiet left behind by people who work long shifts. I set the tote on the table, washed my hands, and opened my paper notebook. One page, one line, no decoration. When truth and paperwork are bright enough, silence is the safest choice. I wrote it in my own hand and let the sentence sit there like a small door that had just closed cleanly. I uploaded the day's files from my phone and laptop into a single archive and checked the cloud sync notice until it turned complete. Then I muted the loudest numbers for a week, a cooling period that asked nothing from me but a thumb pressed against a screen. I turned the ringer back on for the few people who love without tallying. The apartment hummed a refrigerator, a heater, the city breathing through vents. I made tea and stood by the window while steam curled upward. The storm could spend itself elsewhere. I had done my work for today. The record stood taller than the noise and peace, modest and real, fit back into my pocket. Night folded over the city the way a quilt folds over a tired body, and for a while the apartment held that good hush that comes after work is done. Steam curled from my mug and tapped my cheek like a reminder to keep breathing. I stood by the window and watched taillights drift along the street below a red ribbon pulled slow and straight. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor laughed, the sound softened by drywall and distance. I set the mug on the table and felt the small pride that comes from records squared away and choices kept clean. The first hit shook the door hard enough to jump the tea back over its rim. A second blow followed heel against wood, a crack of sound that told me the force behind it was not going to tire soon. My name came through the slab as a command, my father's voice thick with a fury I recognized from years of it, finding targets it had no business finding. The hallway carried him to me like a storm carries branches. I moved without running, phone in hand, camera open, one photo of the door before anything worse, a second angled at the deadbolt. Then the room numbers above the peephole and a wide shot of the corridor. Another hit landed, and the wood around the strike plate answered with a dry split. The old reflex to argue rose in me for a blink, and then fell away under a cleaner instinct. Document, then call. Across the hall, Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker cracked her door and looked out with that brand of courage older women carry like a cardigan. She told me later that she dialed the front desk and asked for security now. A minute later, the night guard rounded the corner with a small camera and a clipboard, all business, no theater. He photographed the frame and the splintering edge for the building log, and stood a body's width between the door and the man doing the pounding until help arrived. I gave the dispatcher my address and cross-street my name, his name and the language for what was happening. Possible property damage, disturbance, and attempted break-in at a secured unit. I told her he was my father. I told her I was inside alone, the door still locked, the building guard present. She asked for descriptions, and I gave them. She told me to stay on the line. I kept my voice low and even. Calm helps people help you. Another kick. This one split a narrow vein of wood into a fringe around the lock. I took close-ups of the damage while my hands shook. The guard told my father to step away from the door. My father did not step. The guard lifted his radio, and the hallway went quiet in that peculiar way only hallways in trouble ever go quiet. Sirens do not always wail. Sometimes they arrive as a quick wash of blue against paint. 2 officers came at a measured pace. Steady boots, steady faces. Officer Daniel Ortiz positioned himself between the man and the door and instructed him to turn and place his hands where they could be seen. The instructions were firm and unadorned. My father argued at a volume meant for neighbors, then sagged under the weight of his own story when it found no purchase. Officer Ortiz secured him with a precision that looked almost gentle if you did not know the word control. Officer Natalie Brooks asked if I was safe behind the door and if I could open it now. I unlocked and let her in with the guard. She took in the splintered frame first, then the room, then me. She asked for my account of events in my own words. I gave her the short, clean version. The calls that began at the venue, the texts that asked for money I was not required to provide, the arrival at my door, the pounding, the damage, the presence of the neighbor across the hall and the guard. I pointed to the photos on my phone, each with a timestamp. I offered the folder of earlier logs and the email summary I had sent the planner that morning. I used the phrases I knew would help. Disturbing the peace. Attempted break-in. I did not add color. Color belongs in stories, not in reports. She wrote while I spoke her questions designed to build a spine under the narrative. She asked if I wished to file a formal report. I said yes. She asked if I wanted information about a restraining order. I said yes. She gave me a card with a case number and the victim advocate line handwritten along the edge. She explained in calm language what the next hours would likely look like and what the next days could hold if I chose to pursue an order. She did not overpromise. I found mercy too. The neighbor stood in her doorway with a robe tied tight and gave her name and unit number when asked. The guard handed over the property log entry and the photos he had taken for the building. One clean chain from damage to documentation to report. A process that, when it works, makes a person feel less alone. They walked my father down the hall. His shoulders looked smaller than any story he had ever told about himself. For a second, I wished for a different man in a different hallway. The wish passed. Love is not a hall pass for harm. When the elevator doors closed, the building seemed to exhale. Officer Brooks examined the lock again and suggested a temporary brace for the night. She gave me a maintenance number to reach after hours and suggested a written request to management in the morning with photos attached. She advised me to keep the damaged screws and the splintered pieces bagged if maintenance removed them. Evidence is not only for courtrooms. Evidence is for the self that needs reminding later that the facts were solid. After they left, my hands remembered the tremor my mind had postponed. I leaned my back against the wall and let the shakes move through me like a weather system. Then I moved the hall table to brace the door and slid a chair under the knob for good measure. I sent the maintenance request through the resident portal with attachments and a short description of the incident reference number from the police report included. I emailed myself copies of tonight's photos and dropped them into the same archive as the wedding confirmations. I added a line to my paper notebook. Doors require locks. Locks require law. Law requires paper that can bear weight. The tea had gone cold. I tipped it into the sink and rinsed the cup, the tiny chores of ordinary life, refusing to flee the room. A text arrived from the guard to confirm he had filed the building entry. I saved it and thanked him. I turned out the kitchen light and let the apartment dim to the degree my nerves could stand. The chair against the door looked almost comical, and then it looked like common sense. My breath slowed. My heart matched it a quiet metronome, finding the measure again. I sat on the edge of the sofa and let fatigue collect behind my eyes. Shaking, but clear-headed. That was the phrase that fit. I had defended my door with law and proof. The night would hold. The apartment had gone still enough that I could hear the clock on the stove tick when my phone lit the dark with a new message. Tessa. Short lines sent fast. Mom took your laptop and camera. Parkway Pawn on 4th Street, about 300. My body went quiet the way a lake goes quiet before a storm. Not surprising. Acetling. I reached for the zippered folder I keep under the coffee table and laid everything out on the couch in tidy rows. Purchase receipts, box photos, serial numbers printed on a page and circled in ink. I called the non-emergency number on Officer Natalie Brooks' card and gave the case number from the door incident, then the new facts. 2 items taken from my room without permission. A text admission from my mother that matched the location Tessa provided. Receipts and serials in my possession. She said she would take the theft report and asked me to email the documentation while we stayed on the line. I opened the laptop, scanned each receipt, attached the box photos that showed the labels, and pasted the serials into the body of the message so no one would have to dig. Officer Brooks said she would contact the shop manager at Parkway Pawn. She read the number aloud so I could hear it match the listing I had pulled up on my screen. While I sat there with my mug cooling beside me, she called the store and asked for the manager by name. Mark Castillo answered. He checked his system while she waited, and then confirmed that an intake had been processed that afternoon. A laptop and a camera. The ticket listed a female seller with a home address that was familiar and a copy of identification captured per policy. I forwarded my mother's text to Officer Brooks as we talked. The message where she wrote that she had pawned my equipment and that I owed her 300 plus interest. The timestamp matched the intake time at the shop within the hour. I heard the officer ask Mark to hold the items in their sealed area pending serial verification and to note the police case number on the ticket. He agreed without fuss. He read the pawn ticket number and she read it back to him. She asked him to photograph the items as they sat sealed and to email those images to the address on her signature. Clean lines were being drawn in real time and I felt my shoulders drop. I built a small packet while they worked. A one-page summary listing the make and model of both items, each serial number, the date of purchase, and the total value. Beneath that, I added the text admission from my mother and the name of the neighbor who had witnessed the door incident. I saved the packet as a single file labeled with tonight's date and sent it to the officer with a polite line that I would make myself available for any in-person identification if needed. She replied that the hold was in place, that the shop had confirmed the serial fields in the intake matched the pattern of my numbers, and that once the formal match was logged, we would arrange retrieval. The word retrieval sat in my chest like a small, warm stone. I had imagined going to war for my own property. Instead, this felt like stepping onto a marked path and following the signs. My anger did not vanish. It simply had a railing to hold. Officer Brooks told me what would come next. She would file the theft report under the existing case, attach my packet, attach the shop confirmation, and note the hold. The advocate line could answer questions about a no-contact order if the pattern continued. If the items were released, she would meet me at the shop to close the loop with a property receipt. I texted Tessa a simple thank you and told her I had given the police everything they needed. I did not ask her for more details. She is still a child in a house that trains people to measure their words. I took screenshots of our exchange and saved them with the rest. Then I opened a fresh page in my notebook and wrote out the sequence in plain language. My receipt and serials, her written admission, the pawn ticket with verified ID. The shop is held in a sealed area, the officer's call and case number. Chain of custody does not have to be dramatic to be strong. An email from the shop manager arrived with 2 photos. Black plastic bins on a metal shelf in a locked room. My model numbers are visible through clear tape on the packaging. He wrote that the items would remain untouched pending police direction. I saved the images and felt an odd thread of gratitude for a man who chose to do his job without making me bleed for it. Systems are made of people. When people do their part, a woman can sleep without standing guard. The apartment eased back into itself. I rinsed the mug and set it down. I gathered the receipts and slid them back into the folder, then placed the folder in my tote where it would sit by the door. Tomorrow there will be a call about timing. Tomorrow there might be forms to sign and a signature to match. Tonight was enough. The line from me to my things had been redrawn. Not by begging, not by shouting, by paper, by phone calls, by names written where they belong. Morning came in thin gray, the kind that asks for practical shoes and a steady plan. I called the precinct and confirmed the civil standby time Officer Natalie Brooks had set. We agreed to meet at the curb outside Drew's building so I could ride in her cruiser and keep my hands free. Drew pressed her car keys into my palm anyway and told me to use her sedan for hauling if the officer okayed it. I thanked her with the kind of quiet that belongs to people who are tired and still moving. At my parents' street, the winter trees held themselves like witnesses. Officer Brooks parked 2 houses down and explained again what a civil standby is and is not. She would keep the peace. She would not referee old arguments or decide ownership beyond what I could show. Paper would do the talking. I nodded and felt the comfort of boundaries drawn out loud. We walked up the driveway together, her pace ahead, me carrying a clipboard and a small roll of tape for boxes. Denise opened the door with her mouth already set. She said that everything in this house was family property. Officer Brooks answered that today was about items I could document as mine. I lifted the folder I had prepared receipts on top, photos beneath, serial lists clipped to the back. We started in my old room. The desk I bought during the pandemic sat under the window with the same small chip at the back left corner I remembered making with a mug. I showed the receipt and a photo from the delivery day with the serial sticker visible. The officer nodded and noted the description in her pad. Denise said that desk had been in this house for years. I said yes because I brought it here with me years ago. The paper carried more weight than any memory in that moment. I boxed winter clothes, books, framed photos, and the bedding I had purchased with my first paycheck. Each item that required proof got its proof laid beside it for the officer to see. The living room rug was next to the one I bought last spring when the old one frayed beyond repair. I had a photo of the tag and the online order confirmation. Denise objected again and folded her arms. Officer Brooks repeated that I could take what I could document, and that any dispute beyond that would be a civil matter for another day. She delivered it without heat, and that lack of heat took the theater right out of the room. Trip by trip, I carried boxes to Drew's sedan with the back seats folded down. The January air bit enough to keep me honest. Neighbors glanced from porches, curious eyes above coffee cups. In the hallway, Tessa's door stood shut. I sent a small wish her way without opening it. In the kitchen, I took the set of measuring cups and the 2 pans I had purchased when I first moved back. I left behind the crock pot I could not prove and did not need. Each choice trimmed a cord and made space in my chest. In the garage, I paused by the empty square where a boat might one day sit and let the hollow shape say its piece. I loaded the last box, closed the trunk of Drew's car, and felt that hum of completion you get when the list has been honored all the way down. That was when Frank turned into the driveway in my car. He pulled in at an angle like a man arriving to end a scene. The engine clicked as it cooled. He stood outside the driver's door and rolled my keys across his knuckles. He said we should talk about money. I did not step toward him. I stepped toward Officer Brooks and handed her my registration and title. Both in my name. She checked the documents, checked the plate on the car, and asked me to wait by the sidewalk. She approached Frank with the kind of even authority that keeps people from making worse choices than the ones they have already made. She said the vehicle was registered to me. She said the spare key history did not change ownership. She asked him to return the keys. He started to talk about years and braces and obligations. She kept the request simple and repeated it. He held the keys a beat too long, then set them in her open hand with a grimace that looked like a man swallowing a story that would not sell anymore. She wrote a brief handover note on her incident sheet, including the time and my case number, then asked me to confirm receipt. The jingle in my palm sounded like a latch catching. I took a photo of the keys in my hand with the car visible behind them and added it to today's folder under the heading Returned Property. She suggested that I keep the spare at a location my parents could not access and to consider rekeying as soon as I could. Practical advice sits better than comfort when a person is rebuilding. Denise stood on the porch and watched all of it without blinking. She said that if I were a good daughter, I would leave the car for them until they were back on their feet. I did not answer. My silence made more sense than any speech I could have given. Frank stepped back and looked small in a way I had not seen before. Time does that when it finally has the floor. Officer Brooks asked if there was anything left on my list. I walked through the rooms one more time and took wide photos as they stood. Empty closet, bare desk space, clean carpet where boxes had rested. I left a set of keys to the house on the hall table because they no longer fit any door I needed to open. At the threshold, I thanked the officer. She gave me the incident number for today and reminded me how to file for a no-contact order if I chose. I slid into Drew's car, set the house key on the passenger seat, and then placed my own car keys on top of it for a small moment of symmetry. The weight of both sets together felt nothing like the weight I had carried for years. It felt like the right weight for a woman to hold and still lift her hands to steer. I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw the house shrink to a picture frame as I eased down the street. At the first stop sign, I paused longer than I had to and let the quiet have its say. the last entanglement had closed by the book. Not because anyone learned a lesson, and not because I caved. Because paper and process have muscles people forget about until they do their work. I turned left toward the place I now called home. Lighter, on the right side of the line. April arrived with rain that washed the sidewalks clean and left the maples shining, and I carried boxes up a narrow flight of stairs to a small apartment north of downtown that felt like a blank page I had earned. The first weekend I rolled a coat of deep teal onto one living room wall, slow strokes that covered scuffs and old nail holes, the color drying into something that looked like a promise kept. I opened the windows and let the paint breathe while a breeze moved the blinds and the city hummed along the block. By evening, the wall had settled into a quiet richness, the kind of blue-green that makes a room remember how to be calm. On the table beneath that wall, I laid out my bills in a straight row and did the math that now belonged to me alone. Electricity, water, internet, renters, insurance. And the modest rent that came with a view of rooftops and a parking spot that did not require negotiation. The numbers fit where they needed to fit. About $1,800 for the month, a budget I could carry without grinding my teeth. I set up autopay in my name and watched each confirmation email land in a folder labeled Home, the kind of folder that grows like a garden when you tend it. I checked my bank balance and saw what steady can look like. A small savings account that I fed twice a month and an emergency fund that finally measured something I could count. $3,600 by the end of the month. 2 months of expenses with a note in my planner that said 6 months equals $10,800, keep going. Drew came over one night with a sack of groceries, and Max followed with a toolbox and a new door camera in a neat white box. While I chopped vegetables, he mounted the camera and showed me how the cloud storage worked, simple screens that made sense even to a mind tired of passwords. The app pinged once and showed us the hallway outside my door, harmless and still a picture that soothed more than it should have. Drew set plates on the table and said that a simmer can be better than a boil, and I agreed with my whole body. Their dog Scout flopped under the table like a great unbothered heart, and now and then he put his muzzle on my knee in that simple way dogs have when they sense a person is finally letting down her guard. In the mornings I made coffee and sat by the teal wall with a notebook open to a page titled April Accounting. I wrote the dates the bills would pull, the paydays and the transfer to savings. Then I tracked small victories that add up when no one is bleeding you dry. I returned a library book on time. I patched a loose hem instead of throwing a pair of pants away. I cooked on Sundays and ate leftovers without grief. The first month without a surprise bill from someone else you used to live with feels like standing on level ground after miles of gravel. Tessa and I started meeting on video every weekend, her hair in a messy bun, my laptop propped on a cookbook, because that made the camera angle kinder. We pulled up the FAFSA together and stepped through it line by line, the two of us learning which boxes are more stubborn than others. We gathered documents, tax forms, school codes, and created a clean list of scholarships that matched who she is instead of who others have told her to be. She drafted a short essay about grit that did not need to use the word at all. It was there in the sentences about babysitting during a pandemic and tutoring a younger neighbor in algebra after dinner. We filled out the housing application for the dorms and discussed the difference between a roommate and a friend, a lesson every woman should learn early. I wrote a brief email to my parents from the new apartment, plain sentences without adjectives. Future contact must be by email, only limited to legal or financial matters. No visits without written permission, no calls, no texts. I sent it, filed a copy, and added a rule in my inbox that put any reply into a folder I would read only with a friend in the room. A week later, paper letters started to arrive with my name written in a hand I knew from childhood. I set them on a shelf in a neat stack and did not open them. Boundary is not a synonym for cruelty. It is the frame that keeps a picture from sliding to the floor. The afternoon the award letter landed in Tessa's inbox. I was stirring sauce and listening to a jazz station that hisses when the weather turns. My phone lit with a screenshot and a line of text full of exclamation points, and even without reading the details, I knew the shape of relief when I saw it. Grants a work study. Line a small loan that would not strangle, and a dorm assignment across the green from the library. We held our phones up to our faces on video and laughed like kids who had been told the skating rink would stay open late. That night I printed the letter at work and tucked a copy into a folder labeled Tessa, because some victories deserve more than a cloud. The apartment kept teaching me how to live without waiting for a door to rattle. I changed the batteries in the smoke detector, labeled a bin for holiday lights, put felt pads under chair legs, and kept a small envelope in the drawer for receipts that might matter later. The teal wall caught late afternoon sun and warmed the room to a color I do not have words for. When the mail came, I sorted it. Standing up, paid what was mine, filed what was mine, and set aside what would never again be mine to shoulder. I picked up my phone less and slept more. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a lullaby when you know the bill will clear. I walked Scout with Drew on Sundays along the river path where the city pulls itself long and low against the water. We listed the small things that are not small. A shoe that fits. A landlord who answers emails. A friend who texts, "Are you home safe when the weather is bad?" I told her about the growing line in my emergency fund and showed her the note where I had written the 6-month goal like a dare to myself. She squeezed my arm the way mothers do when their children get something right, and the permission inside that gesture met me where I live. On the last night of April, I turned off the overhead light and let the lamp by the teal wall shoulder the evening. The room looked simple and earned. A table with bills stacked neatly, a couch with a throw I bought for $10 on sale, a bookshelf with more room than books, a quiet camera watching the hall. I sent Tessa a good night text and slid the unopened letters a little further back on the shelf. I did not feel cruel. I felt aligned. I walked to the window and looked over the rooftops toward downtown and the dark seam of the river. Then I shut the window, put the key on its hook, and let the apartment hold me not as a guest, not as a caretaker, but as a woman in her own home. Thanksgiving came in quiet and bright, a light powder of snow brushing the rooftops like a soft eraser. Butter and cinnamon warmed the air in my small kitchen while the oven ticked and the turkey rested under a loose tent of foil. Drew arrived with a pan of roasted carrots that made the whole place smell brave. Max followed carrying a folding chair in one hand and a sleepy Scout in the other, the dog already looking for the warmest square of rug. Tessa came last, cheeks pink from the cold, a knitted hat leaving lines on her forehead that made her look both young and unbreakable. We are like people who have learned to bless the ordinary. Drew told a story about a long shift that ended with a patient grinning through a mouthful of ice chips. Max talked about a new interface he was building that would make a good idea easier for tired people to use. Tessa shared a story about her first week in the dorm when the fire alarm sent everyone to the parking lot in pajamas and mismatched shoes. We laughed, not loud, just steady. Plates went from full to comfortable, and I listened to the gentle clink of forks like it was music. After coffee, I set a small key on the table beside Tessa's glass. She looked at it, then at me. I told her with my eyes what we both already knew. This is trust. This is not an open tab. She nodded and slipped the key onto her ring fingers, careful gratitude, clean of debt. Boundaries can be taught without speeches. You set them, you honor them, and the people who love you learn the shape of your eyes. The teal wall held the afternoon sun the way it has learned to do, and I took out my notebook because that is how I keep promises with myself. I checked the month's numbers while conversation moved around me like water around a stone. Rent and utilities lined up where they should. The emergency fund sat steady at 2 months of expenses and had inched higher a little more each pay period, a slow rise that did not need applause. No surprise bills that belonged to anyone else. No sneaky auto pays tugging at a card that no longer served two masters. Peace can be measured. Sometimes it sounds like a quiet balance transfer completed on time. Tessa rinsed dishes while I wrapped the leftovers, and Scout rested his head on my knee like he always does when I stand still long enough to be a person again. Outside, the light thinned to that winter silver that makes you see your breath. I stepped to the window and watched the roofs take the snow like a lesson. Thin, patient, certain. My mind slid to a ballroom I had walked out of 11 months ago. I saw my brother's face red with the effort of trying to make his emergency my fault. I felt the smooth weight of my wallet going back into my bag. I remembered the sensation of turning toward a door and choosing the rulebook instead of the storm. I did not feel triumphant. I felt right-sized. We cleared the table and set out pie, a small one, that did not ask for occasion beyond hunger. Drew kissed my cheek and said the apartment looked like I belonged in it. Max screwed the jar back on the cinnamon and told me the camera had picked up a delivery and that the cloud had it safe. Tessa texted a photo to a friend of us in my living room, Scout in the foreground, stealing the attention. I stood there and let the day press a light hand on my shoulder. Later, when the apartment was quiet again, I added a line to my notebook. 1 year of saying yes to what is mine and no to what is not. I thought about the unopened letters on the shelf and how some stories only close on paper. After a calm year, I have room for one more decision that belongs to me. Keep my boundaries absolute, or allow a cautious conversation by email only clipped and clean to close what still needs closing. I did not choose tonight. Sometimes maturity is the patience to let a question breathe. I washed the last plate and set it to dry. I locked the door and checked the camera because that helps a woman like me sleep. I turned off the kitchen light and let the lamp by the teal wall hold the room. The scent of cinnamon lingered, the soft kind that lives in curtains long after the holiday ends. I sent Tessa a goodnight text and another key emoji almost by accident, then smiled at myself and erased it. Trust has already been said. Debt has already been buried. Justice in a family can look like a quiet dinner where everyone pays for what is theirs and no one raises their voice. If this story steadies your breath, share it with a woman who needs proof that quiet boundaries work, and stay with me for more small acts of everyday justice.